back to another edition of the Michigan Lacrosse Review. My name is Greg Normand, your host. We stay home in the mitten this week, talk to Albion head coach Jake DeCola. Jake was born in Boston, spent some time in Utah and North Carolina until he worked his way back to the state of Michigan. Jake's going to talk about what it's like to mentor young men in college, a little bit about his family, and a lot about being a sculptor, which is a whole interesting discussion that we got into with Jake. And I think you're going to find this to be one of the more interesting interviews we've conducted here at the review. We look forward to talking to Jake. We'll be back in a second. Hi, welcome back to another edition of the Michigan Lacrosse Review. My name is Greg Normand, your host. We're lucky enough to have with us today one of the outstanding Michigan Division III coaches from Albion, Jake DeCola. First of all, Jake, thanks for taking the time to talk to us. We're interspersing some local guys, some very successful local coaches here for the Michigan Lacrosse Review with some of the sort of legends, if you will, as a companion piece for the Michigan High School Lacrosse Coaches Association Hall of Fame. That's a mouthful. Interview section. So, Jake, thanks for taking the time out because I know it's you're in season and it's busy for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we're certainly busy this week. We've had to move our game back from Saturday to Sunday because we had a couple of glaciers show up on our field, and we got a great grounds crew. They really kind of did an awesome job to help us get that game in last week. It's a pretty good Otterbein team. So, we got that in on Sunday. That pushed us back. Had to have our day off on Monday. And so, we're caught up, but we got a good opponent coming in. So today's going to be a busy day out there for sure.
I haven't been able to ask this question, and this is just an inside baseball thing. Maybe explain to folks who don't understand. It snows, you go out and shovel the sidewalk. When it snows and you have to go out and sort of remove the snow from a $1 million turf field, it's not just grabbing some shovels and going because you can't damage the field. So it's a bigger thing than folks think.
Yeah, we have like a $3-something million facility to take care of. And the carpet alone, as you said, is about $1 million of it. And there's an entire technology of how to take care of that. I have my theories on my athletic trainer calls it my weather gut. But I think I really believe that if we maintain the turf with proper care, and that involves plowing, and we do it with the right tools and equipment, that overall we're going to put less stress on the carpet. And, and that's an endeavor, so if it hits with 2 inches, a lot of guys would like to see that to kind of melt off. And, sometimes you can wait and do that. But if it freezes out there and then you get hit with a foot on top of it, you got a real problem. Yeah. So our crew has done a fantastic job of just kind of clearing it as it comes. And they start that before our guys are even back in January. They'll start clearing that to make sure that, we can keep it as green as possible. And I do think also, Greg, what's interesting is once it's green, it tends to stay green unless you get hit with a real dump. So like today, it's been snowing all day here in Albion at about, a quarter inch every couple hours accumulation rate everywhere but on the turf, which was warmed up all day yesterday. So now that it's green and clear, it'll kind of melt that light snow as it comes in. So we're very lucky to have a crew that's that dedicated, but yeah, it does take an incredible amount of effort.
I think the other aspect too is that we keep moving the season back. It used to be traditionally you start basically the 1st of March, and maybe if you're lucky, you start a conference season by the middle of March, play your 6 weeks, and off you go. Well, we keep with the advent of indoor facilities like Detroit Country Day, Brighton's building one. Everybody's got some kind of an indoor facility. We keep moving the season back, and we're playing now in weather that we would have never thought of playing in weather even a decade ago. And
I remember in high school.
I'm not sure.
I remember in high school in New England, Greg, we go out for our first sticks work during hockey season. And the wind would whip off the building so hard that you couldn't breathe when you were running your laps with, right. And the equipment was so bad back then, as you know. And I think about that and I'm like, that was months before we, because it was only once, twice a week because we're in hockey season that we would do that. And that was months before we would have our first practice. And I think about my own college experience as a player, we might lose a scrimmage because of rain, but all the snow and everything, that was well gone before we ever had anything come up on the field. So yeah, it's a little bit different. But it comes up in discussion every year, why are teams hosting games in February? This year we had a scrimmage with 1 week of work in scrimmage of Division II team. And like, I think the answer for us is like Albion's a really, really tough academic school. Like, and our guys are going to be incredibly successful for the rest of their lives. And I feel like by using that football model of like a week of prep and a game Saturday, rather than waiting 5 weeks and then starting playing twice a week, it's just better for our guys to keep them in class and let them focus on their academics in the early part of the season when we're in non-conference play.
I didn't mean to get off on that tangent. It just
Yeah, no problem.
One of those things. Jake, we always start interviews going back to the beginning. You grew up in the North Shore of Boston in Beverly, played there. I'm not mistaken. When's the first time you picked up a lacrosse stick? Are you a hockey lacrosse guy? Is that the
Yeah,
way
so I played, well, I'd be lying if I said that I played like the traditional mode of hockey coming up. Like back then in Boston, it's high school hockey. It's not really club. I think it's changed a little bit now, but like you play for your high school team if you want to be recruited, you know, especially back in 91 when I graduated high school, which is a long time ago. But, you know, I mean, we just all skated, you know, so some of our guys skated with the idea that they were going to somehow do camps and skate high school. I skated with the idea because I loved it. And, you know, I was told after I wrestled my freshman year in high school, and I was told that I would have made varsity as a goaltender. And like, you know, I didn't even try out because they had like 5 goaltenders. And then they later told me like, we were ready to cut like 2 guys and kind of build into the future. And like, it wasn't necessarily like I was more skilled or anything. It's just they had some guys that they weren't that happy with, and they appreciated how hard we worked on the pond all year. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so I kind of came from that vein, but I picked up lacrosse because I think it was my dad that told my brother he has to play 2 sports, and he played football. And, you know, he was kind of a rising 9th grader, and all his buddies were like, well, you know, what are you gonna do for your second sport? And he's like, well, I've never played another sport, so I guess I'll play lacrosse. And I remember like when he bought his first stick, I learned because he would like berate me and beat me if I dropped the ball. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
So we had one ball. There was like the one ball. There was like the one lacrosse store in town that sold lacrosse sticks. You could only buy them when they got like 4 in or 5 in. And like whatever color they had, blue was brine usually, and black or red was SDX. Like whatever color they got, that's what you got. You know, and our colors at the high school were orange and black. So I played with the blue Super Light 4, which is like the worst stick ever. It had a sidewall like this. It was like a women's stick, but for a learner, it had a super tight throat. So it actually looks a little bit like a contemporary stick. It was such a specific shape. And but it was impossible to learn on. But every time I dropped the ball, my brother would kill me because we had the woods behind me. And then like you had to chase the ball into the street and then dig in a bunch of leaves and try to find it. But that's how I learned to play. I bought my stick, and the guy who sold it to me taught me how to take care of the leathers, taught me how to pound the pocket. And you got like almost a private lesson, you know, in how to hold a lacrosse stick. And that was a pretty cool part of the sport that's sort of gone. You know?
Why goalie?
Reggie Lemlin.
Okay.
Yeah, came down from Calgary Flames and was one hell of a goaltender for the Bruins. Never won the cup here or anything, but was just revolutionary in the way he played. Was actually the guy who invented the butterfly and the lightweight pad, although he doesn't get credit for it. And it was like he was like a hero for me. And I love playing hockey goalie. I played lacrosse goalie because I loved goalie. I did not love lacrosse goalie. And like I had to kind of self-teach that position a little bit through my hockey background. But I just felt like I was like, Greg, I was like 5'7" in high school, maybe 5'8" for a while. And I think I went like $130, you know? So like I used to get beat on in everything I did. And so, you know, when it came down to goal, I always had a lot of success. Just kind of, I could manage that job, and my size wasn't much of a negative factor. So I think that's how I ended up in there. Gotten bounced around a little bit in the field, and my sophomore year made varsity as a goaltender.
As a Boston guy, I actually played in a couple of bean pots when I was a state.
Yeah.
And you have to play hockey in Boston to understand what you already know, and I'll that's again inside baseball. But talk briefly as an old goaltender, an old catcher. I asked the question, you didn't want to play goaltender for lacrosse because, and that was a question. And the follow-up is, I have a belief that it takes very special person to play goal. You don't put the fat kid in the goal like when it was in our day. And on my day, you go in the goal as a fat kid when you're 7 and you have all that ice time. By the time you get to be 14, you're the best skater on the team because you had more ice time than anybody else. But I think it takes a special personality to have projectiles coming at you. Yet sometimes we think of throwing the kid in the net that's sort of the right fielder kind of kid. Is that a fair assessment?
You put me on the spot a little bit. I'd never say I'm special at anything really. But I would say that the normal human response for when things are being thrown at you at 100 miles an hour is to blink, and you have to unlearn that response in order to be successful in the goal. And then to get from that to enjoyment, I think that's where the personality comes in. So I think to be successful in any sport, you have to kind of have a little bit of a warrior mentality, but then you sort of have to take pride, if you're going to be successful in the goal, of ruining people's afternoons. And I think like all the good ones love to do that. And I don't know if I was ever a good one. I think my junior year in college was nationally ranked top 12 in save percentage. But I like my kids I've had at Albion way better. They can benefit from some of my experiences. We can talk them through some things, but they're at such a different level in terms of training. They have all the advantages in the world. We've had a kid ranked number 3 in the country in save percentage, 2 kids that were player of the year. It's like really, really, really awesome, the amount of success. We've had an all conference goaltender every single year since the MIAA named lacrosse as a sanctioned sport, which is pretty cool.
So you coach to your strength.
Yeah, I mean, I try to find kids that, like, I always tell guys when we do anything on goaltender, like, number one, like, thing I look for that nobody seems to really look for. Everybody's looking for, like, wicked athletic, sexy looking, like, just quick. And if when you shoot, like, the ball, like, doesn't go in the net, that's what I look for. And then the rest I can teach. Like, the rest of the stuff, the subtleties of stick work, subtleties of positioning, like, it's unheard of, I think, to take a kid who's just doesn't have the gift of seeing the ball and stopping it to turn him into an elite level college goal. It's just really, really hard. We did it with a midfielder one time in conference play, but that kid had elite hands. I mean,
right.
he could be anywhere in the country in any sport. He could probably be a professional, like, ping pong paddle player. You know what I mean? Like, I didn't teach him that. I just taught him how to, like, specifically use his skills that he had. So yeah, I think we have to find, the right material, the kids with the right material.
I think the finite point of being the everything or nothing as a goaltender. If you score, you're a bum. If you save it, you're a hero. I think it takes there's a certain part of the ego aspect, the emotional aspect of goaltending that's not fit for everybody. And you better be thick-skinned, and you better be tough, and you better be able to have some leadership skills. And I'm saying at the top end of it, I think that's something that becomes semi-important. But I wanted to go back just briefly, and before I ask some goalie questions. You said you didn't like playing lacrosse goalie. What was the thing you didn't like?
I didn't say I didn't like it. I just said that as a default. Okay, all right. What's the coolest thing you can do in goal in lacrosse? You can make a 1-on-0 save.
Right.
And you can take a giant, big goalie cradle in that kid's face before you outlet it to somebody else who's going to go make a lacrosse play, right?
Right.
What's the coolest thing you can do on the ice? Split save to a Statue of Liberty and freeze it on TV for a second, and then slowly fall backwards.
Without getting too technical, you were a flopper, and I was a Ken Dryden stand-up goalie with small leather pads. So our approach to the goaltending position would be completely different.
Okay, well, okay, all right, but on that same vein, then you can throw the stack out.
Right.
I was still stacking back in the day.
Right. I guess my point is that I watched today's hockey, and nothing against it, but I watched goalies flop and guys go over the shoulder. They go over the shoulder. They go over the shoulder. Well, if they stay up a little bit, they're not going to go over the shoulder. Yes, they may beat you skate side. I think in our day, the great Sports Illustrated shot would be that redirect to the corner with a really good blade. So it loses somebody. And then I don't want to get lost in the hockey part of it, but
yeah, sure. But I think that's the difference, that the showmanship on the ice was just so much more fun for me,
Yeah.
like just a nasty glove save and just stall it and hold it and then
Right.
wait for the whistle and then,
And
a
keep
little
it
bit
out
of drama,
Yep.
So when I came over to lacrosse, it was just a little bit like, I mean, I had to take my lickings coming up because I was still playing with junior equipment going into, we had a guy who was picked up by the Blues in the draft playing defense for us. So like the pads I had just were not appropriate for the level of high school I was playing. So in my family, like we didn't have a ton of money, my parents always said, like, if you show an interest, we'll find a way to support it, but you can't just today I want to be a high school varsity goaltender, but I haven't made varsity yet, but, I need, $2,000 of investment in order to try out. Like, it didn't work that way for me. My family, it was like, oh, okay, that's something you want to do? Awesome. We totally are supporting you. You're going to have to figure out how to buy skates, number one. You're going to have to figure out, how you're going to afford $2,000 of equipment for a tryout if you don't make the team. Like, we're not saying you're not going to do it.
Right.
And we're not saying you're not, but if you want to do this, you're going to have to make it happen for yourself. And then it kind of taught us a little bit about, like, plan A. Like, I had to really build at all times because of socioeconomics. And again, we weren't starving. We were very lucky, as a family. But, certainly, like, blue collar, Beverly, Massachusetts, north of Boston, like, we didn't have tons and tons of extra cash lying around, And so, you had to really develop that plan. Like, okay, I'm going to look in the newspaper in the middle of the summer for hockey equipment and see if somebody's selling stuff who just graduated high school. And that's where I started. And like, then I got to pay for it. I got to make sure I save enough from my paper route to, in my summer job at the beach to make sure that I can afford this equipment when it becomes available. Like, the funny thing is those skills that I still use today, like in almost everything. Like, when we buy lacrosse balls, I never buy lacrosse balls during lacrosse. Almost never. I buy hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them when they're $1 a ball in the middle of the summer. And like, it just makes sense to me to do it that way. And my boss always says, why do we spend so much on lacrosse balls? Like, well, if I wasn't so good at ordering them, we'd spend twice as much in the middle of spring when we really need them. And so I get myself out of those conversations pretty quick. But so I think lacrosse goalie actually found me. And lacrosse has been so incredibly powerful in my life as the medicine that is provided in the sport and the healing that's brought me as an athlete and a human being, and my ability to give back and have an opportunity to mentor now probably hundreds of young people through sport. It's like been really, really incredibly powerful. And, I am really grateful and thankful for being introduced to the sport of lacrosse. And like, hockey is always my first love, but I'm married to lacrosse.
Okay. Let me take you from Beverly High School, 91. You end up at University of Massachusetts at Dartmouth. Explain that a little bit. But then here's the thing that I found intriguing. Your degree is in sculpture. I don't think I don't know anybody that has I've never met anyone that has a sculpture degree. So you got to explain that one.
That's a cool kind of similar situation. Yeah, I went to school to play lacrosse, and I tried out for the hockey team at UMass Dartmouth, really historically successful. Basically my visits were like, is there lacrosse? Is there hockey? Have I done enough academic work to get into the school? And then can we afford the school? And so I looked at mostly public schools in Massachusetts, and I actually fell in love with the UMass campus. I thought it was really cool, and a lot of people hate it, but it was like really cool architecture. And so I ended up there, played lacrosse, and my first year, I remember telling my folks that I wanted to drop a class And the conversation went something like this. So you need to drop this class because you're going to fail it. It's like, yeah, it was recommended to me that I drop the class. I'm like, well, you need this class to graduate, right, Jake? And I said, yeah, but now you're going to drop it. And I was like, yeah. Like, okay, done deal. Drop the class. Like, great. So I'm thinking like all of a sudden I have less academic work to do, you know what I mean? In spring of my freshman year, I'm all pumped up. And then the next part of the conversation is, so when are you going to save up the extra money you're going to need to take this class in the summer? And I was like, what do you mean? Like, well, you just said you need this class. You just said there's no way you can take more than 3 during a given year because you're a lacrosse player, right? So you're going to have to take it during the summer at a community college so you can graduate on time. But we're not going to pay for that. You are. I was like, oh, all right. So we highly recommend that you don't fail this. What you're going to do is get an A in the class. I was like, I don't think there's any way I'm going to get an A in this class, And so I met with my teacher and my prof was like, yeah, so that's not reasonable. I'm like, well, I know I'm failing. And I know I'm like hovering at a D-, but I really need to get an A. And she was like really nice. And she said, there's no way that could be done. There's no way you can get a B. The best you could possibly make, and it's really and statistically impossible, is like a C+. And I don't think I've seen that from you at all. So here's what you need to do. And she gave me a laundry list, including ace in the final and being the absolute best person in the on-site. It was an ocean biology class on the on-site part of the field project that we were going to do. And so I nailed it. And I think I ended up with like a C, and it was a very generous grade. But like, again, that was just part of my experience down there. And I think culturally helped me form my work ethic a little bit. I had plenty of that in my life coming up. And so it was a good reminder for me to kind of, finish what we start, and I think that's a big part of kind of what we do at the lacrosse program here. Although I will say, Greg, now for the first time ever in my career, I am advising guys in certain circumstances that it might make more sense in some specific circumstances to consider dropping a class when their grade is just irreparable. Because I can tell you that some of those poor grades I had early affected my GPA when I found out that what I really want to do is study art. And get back to your question.
The 20-year-old Jake DeCola says, "I want to be a sculptor."
Yeah.
And was coaching always was sort of the one, and sculpting was the way to get through UMass, Dartmouth?
So, I mean, I think lacrosse is what kept me in school for sure. It's what got me to school. I think my mindset wasn't right for the military, but I think I could have really enjoyed that. I really am thankful for the United States military. And like, I remember at a certain age, just like all of a sudden I realized that like thanking military officers or any uniformed men and women who serves our country is something that I should do. I remember the first time I did it being a little uncomfortable because I've never served. But I think part of the service as a citizen is to say thank you, to those that do serve. So, but I don't know that at that time I would have been a good fit, myself. But I ended up with lacrosse kind of keeping me in school. And then those conversations academically led me and my family to have a sit down. And they said, what's it going to take for you to be successful? And I said, I want to study art. And then like, that was it. And by my
did you have
junior year, I was Dean's List every semester. Senior year was straight A's. And, was able to pull my grades up enough to get into graduate school.
Sculpting? Did you have art talent that you were you an artist all the way, coming up? I mean, was that part of the...
I think it's safe to say that I had been exploring art like forever.
Okay.
And
Okay.
I think my senior year of high school is the only time in my life I didn't have an art class.
Right.
And it was like, that was the beginning of like kind of moving away from art as being like a normal part of a course load. And if you were like a college preparatory level person and you had college preparatory classes, that you wouldn't be studying art, right?
Right.
So they just kind of dropped it from my schedule and I missed it like crazy. So I took an art class my first semester. It was my best grade by far. And I took another one my second semester. And, like I was like, I'll let you use your imagination on the rest of my grades, but they were really bad. but I was straight A's in my art school. So
Okay. So that's what I'm asking. I was a career journalist, but I started writing for my hometown paper as a stringer when I'm 14. So I knew I always wanted to be a journalist. That was never, any contention with sports and coaching where I was a part of that. But that's why I was asking, because I've never met anybody that had actually got a sculpture degree. I just thought that was really unique and kind of cool. And I grew up, we talked to Dom Starza the other day, and Dom wanted to be a coach, spent some time at Brown. He was the first person in his family to go to college, but he came out of a household where dad was a New York cop, and being a coach and going to Brown was a hobby. It wasn't a job.
yeah,
And he's turned it into a pretty good career, to say the least.
yeah.
And so we had this discussion of parents in our generation, the Depression age. If you didn't have a skill with your hands, that wasn't a job. Everything else we did. That's why I was asking the question.
Yeah,
So,
it was a very fine line to kind of navigate giving up like a business or a degree in education or something like that could actually facilitate itself into employment, right? And like my grandmother, my Nana, she worked in a factory. Like, and we hear so much about the immigrant story. And right now culturally, I think it's awesome. We talk so much about how hard it is for people from other skin tones, from other regions to immigrate in this country. And like my Nana was Italian, and she worked her butt off like 60, 70 hours for nothing, nickels. Sure. In a factory stitching clothes, was a dressmaker at the end of her life. And so like, so they've closed it now, but there was this thing called Haymarket, which was just under, I don't know if you remember, it was just under the bridge. Like, really cool people would go there and, show up after watching the Celtics, on a Saturday and, just shop around and like pick up cool piece of fish. Like my grandmother shopped there out of necessity because she had like 35 cents in her hand, and whatever she could afford is what she would buy, plus pasta, and make her own sauce in her own garden. And like, I think like that was part of my legacy. That's like, we couldn't escape those stories. Those stories are part of what formed me as a young person. So it was weird to then say, yeah, I want to study art. It didn't go so great with my my dad. Had trouble understanding that. And then, my Nana, like, she's like, oh yeah, you mentioned my hair. This is how it was when I was in college. So she was like, oh yeah, you got the long hair of a girl, Jacob. Why don't you cut that and shave your beard and go get a job? So it's pretty funny.
Yeah, I get that. So from East Coast, you end up in the master program at Utah.
Yep. And was, coaching lacrosse the whole time, right? I would coach camps. I went back. I had a job for a year working for an artist and coached for my old college team. Got to Utah and was kind of playing with the Utes as a club team and coaching a little bit, coaching summer, coaching clubs, coaching camps, and just kind of fell in love with that and studying. And then I actually met my wife while I was at the U. She did her undergrad at the U. She's from the South, but she went to school at Utah in dance. And I kind of saw her in the hallways. She was still kind of kicking around. And then we met after I finished up my graduate.
Were you in Salt Lake before the boom of lacrosse?
We got out of there like right when it was kind of starting, right before the Olympics came. Like we left, and the Olympics kind of changed some of the things that were happening culturally in the city of Salt Lake, but they'd already kind of shifted dramatically from, there's a very Mormon culture, right? And so all the folks that make the law tend to be, Mormon. So like the governing rules kind of were a little bit more Mormon heavy. Right. But by the time I was going out there in the late 90s and left there in 2000, like, that was less so for sure. And the Olympics, I think, changed a lot of that. My brother still lives there actually. So,
right.
But the lacrosse boom was so Angie's, my wife's like high school boyfriend, because she did like a couple of years of high school there. Like he played lacrosse at Judge Memorial, right? And Judge Memorial went on to be a dominant Salt Lake power. And now like there's so many kids playing in Salt Lake that like I think Judge still does okay, but like there's a lot of places that developing talent. And one of my great friends, Mason Goodhand, who everybody in lacrosse kind of tends to know, he played at Air Force in the day. He played club with them, and he kind of got me really into coaching. Was one of my mentors in coaching actually, and really always kind of spoke with me about, like I was always driving kids, but he always spoke with me about, making sure that we were always there to take care of their hearts and fill them with emotional wellness. And like, I'm grateful to him for it. But he and I kind of met, and he kind of was there to just promote lacrosse all over the state. And just, he would go to a place for a couple of years, build it into a dynamic program, then just go start another one somewhere else. He did that all the time.
How long were you in Utah?
I'm going to say like almost 10 years.
Okay. So a long time. Brian,
I think that's right. Maybe it's less. Maybe it's like 8 years. Maybe it's like
Brian Hollman, the just now stepped down coach, the head coach at Utah.
Yeah.
Who come from North Carolina as an assistant. And if you're not sure who Brian is, Marcus Hollman is obviously his son. He talked in glowing terms. We spent a lot of time in Salt Lake with the U.S. ski team headquarters over there. So I know the city pretty well, and it's an amazing place. Salt Lake is a a different kind of place, but if you get past some of it's a really cool place. So obviously from Utah, Guilford, am I saying that right? Guilford,
yeah. So Angie actually got a fellowship to study graduate school in writing down at UNCG in Greensboro.
Okay.
And she looked at a lot of different programs. I think we're kind of lucky we ended up in Greensboro. It's a beautiful place. And I was sort of wanting to get back east a little bit, sort of like being back east, but not really. And for her, it was sort of like being in the South, but not really,
Right.
So we were both pretty happy there. And I, again, kind of coached high school at a couple of different places, and then started at Guilford somewhere around like 2005, something like that. And really it was like an accident. Like I went and watched. So the guy who hired me was John Burke, who was like an All-American there in the 90s. Like Guilford was a top 10 team in the 90s, like really, really very good. And it's like kind of like the pre-ODAC days, as far as Guilford being in the ODAC. And like, so when John hired me before that, I like went to watch a game under the former coach. And I was like, yeah, like I kind of liked campus. I certainly liked the lacrosse enough, but I was surprised that it wasn't, I guess I'm going on record here, but I was a little surprised it wasn't a little better. And
financially,
and I wanted to kind of, pardon?
Financially?
No, the lacrosse. I thought the lacrosse might be a little better.
Okay.
I went to just observe a game, and then I offered my services to like be a volunteer, and I was denied. And I was like, okay, like maybe I'm not good at this, like maybe there's things other people know at the college level that I don't know. And so I just went back to coaching some high school. But then I was in a club team with Danny Citrone, who's like one of my best friends and mentors, and really helped me navigate like being an assistant, doing it well, grow as a coach in the college game, know what those expectations look like, and do it on a shoestring. Like he was unbelievable. Like the amount of work and good they were able to promote out of the Greensboro lacrosse program while Danny was there is just unreal when you really know the inside story in terms of at that time what they didn't have and the things that they didn't have, like budget wise and stuff like that. Anyway, as a side note, Danny's a legend, and he and John Burke, coaching the club team, invited me out to work with the goaltenders, and I was like, this is what I want to do. Like,
okay,
all the kids could catch and throw. All the kids were elite level. It was John Burke's first year, and that club team would have beat his college team that we had. Like they were good. Like, and like we just had like triad area, like in that Greensboro hub. So, certainly cities around Greensboro for sure, but it's basically like Greensboro and then like kind of like towns more around it. but like those kids were great. They could all play. They played hard, and I had a blast. And John said, "Why don't you just come coach with me, and we'll figure it out." And so that was really kind of like how I got into Guilford. And then John actually ended up moving on. Andy Rowe took over, and as head coach, he was there a year prior than I was hired. And so then I kind of like, and he was a bit younger, so we had to kind of figure things out on our own. And with Danny as a mentor, for me, I sort of had like, Andy's experience from OU and how they did things, and then Danny's kind of guidance for how to really kind of do a great job when you're trying to figure things out a little bit. So that was kind of that experience. And then, the real learning was like, I'll never forget this, right? We went up to, Roanoke came down. And like, I think this was our first ODAC game, my first year. And I remember I remember Coach Pilot from like when I was a kid, you know what I mean? Like, I remember like the camps and hearing about that stuff, the goalie school. So like, and I think at that time, and probably still, I'm like dangerously confident, you know what I mean? For no reason in any situation. But like, I feel like we thought we were going to be pretty good. We had like 17 really good freshmen. And I was like, yeah, we had a pretty good preseason in non-conference games. And I was like, yeah, we're going to be fine here. And I'll never forget. Roanoke came down. They had, now that I'm on the spot, I can't think of his name, but they had an All-American goaltender, at least one All-American defenseman. Madeline, I think, was a goaltender. And then just players everywhere in every single position. A nasty Canadian crease kid that like we had shut off with 2 long sticks that still scored like no problem. I think he had like 6 or 8 goals. And anyway, in the first 30 seconds, we got to stop. I think more because they threw it out of bounds in transition off the faceoff. Like they could have scored, but they just missed the play. So I was like, yeah, we're going to clear this. We're going to be fine. We're going to get the first touch. And so we back up a shot in transition, and we're about to start our offensive set. Our best player has the ball, and they call Bulldog immediately on our first possession off the first end line ball. And Bulldog is when, usually you have your goalie shut off away from the ball. This was a play where the goaltender comes out and doubles with the All-American defenseman. And so he doubled on the ball. He was so good athletically. He was a monster physically. It was the most intimidating thing for that kid I imagine he'd ever faced in his college career. And it happened in the first 30 seconds of this game. So an immediate turnover. And then they came down and scored in training immediately. Their bench exploded. And I looked at our head coach. I'm like, we might lose by 30, like, that was my immediate first thought. And they barely breached 30. I mean, I think if they hadn't slowed down, I remember too, like I have another unbelievable Bill Pilot story that I have to tell while we're on this subject. But I remember too, like I learned pretty quick, like you don't want to foul those guys after they put their warm-ups back on. Like, you know what I mean? Like if they had like the first group had sat down and the second tier attack guy was out, like they would be up by 15. If you fouled them, first group EMO went out to score. And then it was like, if you're going to pull me off the bench, I'm not going to just sit down for you after we score. We're going to hang out for a little while and get a couple more points on the board. Like I remember like telling my guys afterwards, like, I learned something as a lacrosse coach, and that's like, man, you do not want a stupid foul just to try to do, it doesn't say anything about you except you're going to see the first team group again. And so you really got to be, like you have to have a sense of awareness. Like it's not the time to foul when you're down by 14. So, but after that game, they went down and, they were a rowdy bunch, and I honor them for it, but they grabbed our inline balls on the way out while they were screaming at us. It was hilarious. At the time, I don't know if I thought it was funny, but, tons of respect for what they were doing back in those days in the program. It's unreal.
You mentioned ODAC, which is the Old Dominion Athletic Conference.
Yeah.
That's the equivalent of the MIAA down there. Am I right? All Division III teams?
All D3. Yeah. I mean, one of the differences there, I think, historically one of the strongest in the country. NESCAC now is unbelievable too, but you're talking about, at least while I was there, 4 teams every year in the top 10. It was really unparalleled. And I think that's probably more NESCAC now. But yeah, for sure, a powerhouse. Like I learned a lot about, coaching. I mean, studying film, that was all DVDs, and like you didn't get the DVD right away. So, and I had, by the time I got out of there, I had Camille, who is under 1 year old. She was about 3 when we moved. So for about 2 years, she'd be in my arms, falling asleep, because the DVD might come, Wednesday, and so my boss would watch it in the office on Wednesday. Then I'd get it, and I'd have to be done. Like I'd get it after practice, and I'd have to be done with it, with all our prep work for Thursday's practice. And then I had to work. Like, by the way, I was just part-time,
Right.
On paper, I was full-time, or rather, for all intents and purposes, I was full-time in terms of the amount of work I had to do for us to have any success. But I also had to keep a part-time job going, or a full-time job going, from 6 a.m. to 3 p.m. so that, I could take care of my family, because I had a daughter who, was just being born. My wife was pregnant, so she didn't work. And then, all of a sudden we had Camille, and we had to have insurance. And so that's where actually you asked about it a little bit, like when did I make a direct shift away from full-time art and a little bit of coaching? And it was kind of in those Guilford days where I sort of started to figure out, like, if the art doesn't start making some money soon, like I'm gonna have to figure something else out. So I actually was a professional welder for about 1.5 years, and then was in home remodeling at high-end homes in Greensboro, like where we would tear out a brand new kitchen that was 5 years old that cost $80,000 and then put in a $180,000 kitchen in the exact same house. It was unbelievable.
I ask all those questions because if you talk to, we've interviewed a lot of PLL players who were making $500 a weekend in the old MLL days.
Yeah.
You didn't dress, you didn't get paid.
Yeah.
The mentorship that you've had the opportunity, both in retail, in the regular commerce market, and the assistant coaching jobs. If you look at some of the empirical evidence that USA Lacrosse has out now and the NCAA has, younger coaches that have never been mentored or have a limited mentorship are very unsuccessful as it relates to the longevity, because they don't have the time and the experience, and more importantly, the apprenticeship that a lot of kids had that opportunity to put in. You had that opportunity. So now Albion comes on the marketplace. You have made the decision that you want to be a full-time coach. Talk briefly about the process of being more prepared for Albion because of your mentorship in the places you've been, and how Albion got there, and how you kind of ended up in South Central Michigan, for lack of a better term.
Yeah. So I was lucky to meet a good friend who worked at Guilford, used to be the AD at Worcester, and was another mentor for me. And, we were kind of talking about a plan for me. And it's interesting. Like, I think some things fell in my lap, right? But they did that because I was in the midst of a plan that I didn't have on paper. And then you always hear, if you do any amount of reading, you read about the plan that you need to have in place. And I remember thinking that was kind of corny, but then I remember that I actually did that myself. And I think there's something to be said for having a plan, like a business plan for your success model, or, a goal sheet for how you're going to do something and achieve it and how it's going to work. And so, we sat down, and Bob kind of was generous enough to point out, he helped me with my resume, and he's like, Jake, nobody who's going to hire you is going to look beyond the fact that you are an assistant at Guilford, right? Like, they're not going to check your record for the last 3 years. And at that time, our record wasn't very good. They're going to just say Guilford. They play top 10 teams every year. And for most people that are starting a brand new program, that'll be enough, because Guilford's a really good academic school. And they'll know that you're going to have enough experience bringing in recruits that you can make this thing work at their place. And he said, and that is a huge advantage for you, Jake, because at the end of the day, if they were incredibly thorough, they might look at your record over the last 4 years at Guilford and say, no, we probably shouldn't hire this guy because, they're barely over 500. They haven't had any All-Americans. And, I actually did mentor one preseason All-American, who was one of the best kids we've had ever. He's a really great defenseman out of Maryland. But, and so part of my mentoring there was creating a plan to look for new programs that needed an experienced coach, someone that was stable, right? And a school that was stable, that would be looking for someone where stability would be a function of what they might want, right? So, like at the time, they were adding the D3 programs left and right in the Midwest. And a lot of them were at schools that went on to have success on the field, but would not be a place that personally I could recruit at. I did one visit at Albion, and it's I was blown away at how beautiful the campus was, because it was 75 degrees and sunny, perfect blue skies, no humidity. And I had just left Greensboro, where it was 90 degrees already, and I was soaking wet on the flight, just getting in the plane. And I came, I was like, this place is beautiful. It was a dream come true. And then winter hit when I finally got the job, and I was like, wow, okay, I get it now. It was pretty cold. But so for me, I think the transition was about looking for that place that would be searching for someone, and stability would be important, enthusiasm would be important, experience, but also I was unique that, I had a lot of experience but also was still on the younger side. So I could do the dirty work of, early on in our budget just didn't allow for, an overnight to say, go to, the eastern part of Pennsylvania. So I drive 5 hours and leave my house at 5 a.m. to see an event. I get there by the first game every time, every Sunday for 2-3 years, until I just couldn't do it anymore. And then at that time, I built a substantial enough budget. College had supported our budget. The college always did what it said it would do: build the program and we'll support it. But they were not about to throw out, $10,000 for recruiting before we had any kids on campus. You know what I mean?
Right.
But, once we got to, I remember having conversations with, I had to do a ball presentation for fun. I had fun with it. It was back to the art project days. And they're like, well, why are we buying balls every year? And I was like, well, let's look at example A. This is a brand new lacrosse ball. Example B is a lightly used lacrosse ball. Example C is a very used lacrosse ball that can't be used in games or practices anymore because it's so slick. And this was before, we got one of those machines that redoes them. And, they were actually really nice. I loved it. So I did, and then example E was like it said, it had a whole tray, and example E was empty. And they're like, where's example E? I was like, oh, that's a lost lacrosse ball. It doesn't exist, So just the educational process took a while. But yeah, for me, it was looking for someone that would say yes. And Albion gave me an opportunity. Albion took a chance on me. And so I wanted to give them my absolute best, and for me, for years, I was an outsider at the college. I was an outsider to Michigan. I didn't know what this meant when guys would do this, and it took me a while to feel comfortable that Michigan was my home. You know what I mean? That I was raised, I've raised my family here. You know what I mean? My dog that we brought only lived in Michigan for under a year, and we'd had her for our whole marriage. Right. And so I always think about my marriage in terms of how long we've been together and where we've been together. And I always thought Angie and I, we had the majority of our life in North Carolina, or maybe it was Utah. Then I think about our dog, and our dog only had a year here. Our dog Bingo now is a border collie. He's been with us his whole life, and my girl's whole life. We've raised him. We've been here 12 years. So now substantially, I've raised the dog here. This is unbelievable. Both my daughters have been raised in the Michigan school systems. They've come to almost every home game we've ever had at Albion. And some point at about year 4 or 5, I was walking down the hall and somebody asked me what year I graduated Albion. And a lot of the coaches at Albion College have graduated Albion, almost all of them. And I remember that it was a real point of pride for me. I was like, all right, I've made it in the world. Finally somebody has asked, or said to me in their own way, you belong.
Jake, there's a lot of, I think of Tony Seaman, I think of Jim Berkman, guys that are nationally renowned that are not Division I coaches at Hopkins or Syracuse or
Yeah.
Virginia, have had unbelievable careers. do you see Albion as a sort of a velvet coffin that where you could spend 25 years there and retire? Or do you look over the landscape a little bit?
I mean, like, the best way I can explain it is like, so I have told my boss this a million times. I love my job. I have told my players know I love my job. I think all the high school coaches know how much I love my job. I've explained it this way. Like, I think it's very easy to say from the outside that like maybe I know what I'm doing a little bit, and maybe I do know what I'm doing a little bit. But like, I think there are very few jobs in the country that I can do what I do here at Albion, and that is offer like an incredible academic experience at like one of the best colleges in this part of the country and play for a championship every single year. And then like, where else I could do that is maybe like the NESCAC, and they probably never hired me. You know what I mean? Like,
Right. No, I get it. And
there are very few jobs. Like I've had calls. I mean, I actually went and talked with some people on something, and I had a high school call me up from Texas, and like, I've had plenty of calls that I've fielded over the years, and they've all been generous calls. But at the end of the day, to be able to do what I do at Albion is incredibly special. And there are very few places in the country that can offer like what I have here. And like, I also think of it this way, Greg, like Albion is what Albion is right now because of what our guys have made, right? And like my application to Albion today for my own job, I don't know if I would be taken for it if I had the materials when I initially applied. You know what I'm saying? So
right.
Like, Albion has given me this opportunity to build a flourishing program. And like the dividends it pays back for me is to be able to do something that I think is incredibly rewarding and special. And I just like, like, I don't know that I could recruit at another place unless I really believed in that academic mission, right? Like really believed in it. And then like the value, like the kids I talked to that have graduated, like it would have to be a pretty compelling offer because like, I'm old, I got 2 kids and now I got an old dog. And, for another Division III school, like I don't know that they're going to make an offer that's comparable to what we have at Albion. And like, a lot of guys, Greg will ask that question, well, what about Division I, Jake? And like, what about Division I? Like Duke is not going to call me. I've heard Coach Dino talk a ton of times, and he is one of the brightest minds on the planet. But like, he's not going to hire me. Like, so most of the Division I jobs that I'd even be able to get would be probably not enough to put, food or insurance together to take care of my family. So the reality is, I'm very lucky to have a job that is of this level of quality. Because when I talk to some guys about some of the challenges they face in Division III, like it makes me never want to leave. You know what I mean? Like guys will like talk to me about like, Jake, we can't play you this year away because my boss just came in and said you need to cut $10,000. Like that's a real conversation on the phone I've had from a friend of mine who's like, Jake, I'm calling you because I know you don't understand. You won't take it personally. I can't come up. And like, I'll say, okay, we'll make it work. We'll find out. I'll try to find another game. But like, I mean, like, look at our schedule. That's why we're on the road a ton. You know what I mean? We're road warriors for the entire month of March. Like a lot of that is like wanting to get a tough schedule, wanting to play the best teams in this part of this country, and the willingness to like understand that at our place, we can support that. Not everybody is going to support, 4-hour road trips every week. So I'm very fortunate that I can do what I want to do here.
Grass isn't always greener, and I appreciate it. So I'll take from what you said that you're pretty happy to Albion. John Danowski, we interviewed John a couple of weeks ago, and John was talking about going from Brown to Duke when his son was a senior, going through all the Duke criminal stuff that happened in 6.
Yeah.
And when he left, his wife and daughter did not go with him. And he had said he's never told anybody that before. And it was 18 months before his wife moved down because she didn't think the grass was greener. Well, it turned out to be, and the question I asked him was, I said, did you go down as a dad to protect your son, or did you go down as a new opportunity as a coach?
Yeah.
And he actually had to stop and think about it. He says, nobody's ever asked me that before. And I thought it was an obvious question, having been a dad and a coach. And it was, he said, hey, the grass wasn't always greener. But when I got here, then it became the place that I wanted it to be. I don't want to keep you a ton longer, but let me ask a couple of simple questions. You've been in the
Yeah,
MIAA.
but I got to tell you something though. If
Go ahead.
you're going to talk about Coach Danowski, like that's one of the best camps I've ever worked in my life. And it should be said that in 100 degrees, Coach was out every single day at camp instructing, every single day with a master lesson. And Matt was there instructing, and they were out there, they were going through the drills, they were addressing the what, the why, the how, huge emphasis on the why. And that was like morning, midday, and sometimes to close camp every single day. Right. And like, I just can't let that go because, it actually changed in my mind what I thought to be the case, but to see it done for one of the best in the world to what, a bunch of 8-year-olds, a bunch of 15-year-olds, like, that somebody might say, well, these guys will never play at Duke because they're from such and such. Like that didn't matter to him. What mattered is they were there and he was there to serve them. So from a leadership standpoint, watching Coach run camps was like awesome for me. This was down when I was at North Carolina.
Jake, this series that we've started as a companion piece for our Hall of Fame for the Coaches Association. I know we talked about this yesterday, but I've talked to 5 of the top 6 all-time winningest coaches in the NCAA. Berkman, Dave Cottle, Tierney. I mean, I've talked to some of the best guys. If this was football or basketball, I wouldn't have this show. I can't get on a phone and make a phone call to Gary Gate and have him call me back. Doesn't work. Well, it works with Gary. It doesn't work if this was, somebody at the NFL level. The two things I take from it, the 2 aspects I take from it are how kind and average, and I mean this in the best possible way, they don't think they're superstars, the coaches and the players I'm talking about. I've got Rob Pennell explaining to me how he's working on his shooting. I'm getting shooting lessons from Rob Pennell that I can take back to my own kids. And I think I know something about shooting. It's, my point is that our sport is not special like every other sport. It's the same as every other sport. We just happen to have a whole lot of guys in it that are really pretty cool. And really, it's amazing. I still scratch my head when I'm talking to John Danowski or to Dave Cottle or whomever it might be because of the class that they have. And I think that's something.
No, I absolutely agree with you, Greg. And like, I tell my players this all the time. I'm like the guys at elite level Division I, like Tierney and like Danowski, like, and all of them, like they're so smart. Like it doesn't matter what the rules are. These guys are going to figure out, how to instruct their kids and get it done. And then like I remember, I've told my guys on multiple occasions, I'm like, it's no accident that Coach goes out to Denver and Denver just all of a sudden blows up. Now, Jamie did an incredible job bringing in talent. Don't get me wrong at all. Like, and I think Jamie is one of the most influential guys for lacrosse too that we have, an incredible mind. When he thinks about lacrosse, I've learned a lot from him. But like somehow, just by Coach showing up there, a year later, they're like, if you don't win a championship, you're breaking our standards. Like, what are you talking about? Like, you know what I mean? A year ago, it was just like, we just want to get better. All of a sudden, Coach is there. And now, like, the standard is a national championship every year at Denver. Like, how does that happen? You know what I mean? That's unbelievable. Right. Like, so I remember, like, telling my guys about what I think about the minds of these guys. And they're like, hey, Coach DeCola, did you see Marquette beat Denver? And I was like, yeah, I did. I mean, Coach Amplo is like one of those brilliant guys you always talk about. Like, maybe so. So now it's like, okay, we got Tierney, we got Amplo. It's like, but like the level of thought that goes into their game is awesome. Like,
but the other,
I saw a 10-man. I was talking to some of the officials. We're going over the rules, Greg, about the 10-man stuff and like what a shot is. And like, is it a shot if you're just throwing it down from your goal line to, the end line and then it's just a foot race? Is that a shot? Is that an attempt? And like, they were talking about that, but like, interestingly enough, I saw this really cool situation where Marquette was in a 10-man versus Denver. I think this was last year. And Marquette snapped their goaltender on the shot into the goal crease. And the officials all of a sudden went from ruling it a shot to a turnover. And so I started thinking about like, okay, so now it's not a shot. So this is a great way for teams to, get out of that problem of what to do when you just huck it 70 yards and do a foot race to chase it. And it really got me thinking. So I started telling all the officials like, hey, just because we're, leaving a goal empty doesn't mean that what they're doing is a shot on goal. I started that conversation with officials. It didn't really get us anywhere, but really got me thinking about just like at what level of intelligence, right, did their coaching staff make that decision to just say, all right, this is their solution. This is what they're going to do. So we're going to 10-man, but at the appropriate time, we're going to get our goaltender back in the crease so that when it's out of bounds, it's going to be a pass and not a shot, because the officials will only call it a shot if there's no goal. It was crazy. Like, it was eye-opening for me to see that.
Right.
It's pretty awesome.
The other thing, I want one last question after that, but the other thing I was going to mention is that the thing that talking with these guys, and you've been at those camps, and I hope you understand what I'm about to say. It also validates that if you've done your work as a coach in this sport, that sometimes you doubt yourself because, well, if they're at Duke, they must be better than you. And it also gives you the validation that maybe you do and have worked at your craft and have attained some level of success in knowing how to coach and knowing how to deal with people. Because as you're having these common discussions with the best in the business, your principles and your philosophies aren't a whole lot farther off than theirs are. And that's my point of the mentorship earlier in that conversation. The more we talk about these things, the more we share the knowledge with those who don't maybe have it. And I think that's the beauty of the conversations that we've had, because it's a common thread amongst all of them about how they treat everybody slightly different and programs are different, but the commonality is they love what they do and they love their kids. It manifests itself in a different way sometimes. But my own validation as a coach has been like, wow, I'm having a conversation with these guys and not getting lost. And I think that's something that I didn't think would happen. And it's been kind of cool to be able to have those conversations. My last question to sort of wrap this up.
Yeah, I want to just address that though real quick.
Okay.
Got a minute. I think you're right, but I think, what always is healthy to keep in perspective is pedigree, right? Like, part of what makes some of those guys special is that they had a pedigree of coaching coming up, even like considering their high school basketball coaches, right? Like you mentioned, Berkman coached basketball, right? And like that pedigree being influenced by elite level coaches, like, I think that is the difference, for a lot of those guys. And like, for me, I didn't have that kind of pedigree. So, it's certainly kind of how I ended up at a new program at, like, say, Albion. But like the pedigree I did have is a little different. And for me, like, anyway, it was like Beverly High School. Like, I tell my guys this all the time and they don't believe me. They think I'm kidding. But like, our football team won every year. We went to the state championship my brother's junior year. Our soccer team won the conference and went to the States every single year. I think we're Elite Eight at least one time in my 4 years. Men's and women's basketball were good. Men more dominant. The only team that stunk was wrestling. I wrestled for 1 year. Our hockey team battled for conference and states every single year. Men's lacrosse. We didn't have women's lacrosse. We had field hockey. And like our field hockey coach, we had like some of the best athletes in the world on our campus in high school. And she would scream at them 2 inches from their face, put your face down to the ball on those free position, to get your teeth knocked out. And these are some of the, like, back in those days, those are the best looking girls you'd ever heard of in the universe, And so my pedigree was like a culture of winning at that high school level that was so formative. And I still can't get it out of my head. I remember coming to Albion and talking about things. and with my guys, and they'd just be like, coach, I played football, but my football team stunk. Or like, I played football and we were good, but my lacrosse team was brutal. Like, and for me, it was just odd that an entire school wouldn't just have dominant athletics teams. So, so that's kind of how I came up for sure.
You mentioned, and before I ask my last question, you mentioned pedigree, and it was probably the most salient thought that I'd heard. And when you mentioned Jim Berkman, he says, we have success at Salisbury, where we have these great programs. He says, but don't get too far off the idea that I'm brilliant. He says, every year on my program, I have somewhere between 3 and 5 Division I transfers. He says, that's not true of any other team we play in the country. And in a couple cases, in last year's team, he had a kid who had been a third or fourth best scorer at North Carolina transfer back home. He said, so he says, I'm a brilliant coach when I have great players. So he says, don't get lost in the model that you can draw an X and O's up if you don't have anybody that can execute it. So don't get caught up in your own press, is I guess what he was trying to say. But Jake,
I remember Coach talking at the national convention, and he is an amazing mind. And like, so I know J.O. from Wittenberg, and he'd be a good guy to talk to if you haven't talked to, if you ever get beyond Michigan. But J.O.'s a Salisbury guy, so I got to know Coach through J.O. And we go out and we have pizza at the national convention at least once a night, sometimes twice a night if I'm lucky. And we have, little conversations. And, it actually came up that Coach liked one of our drills that we did a video on. And so I had the pleasure of kind of like telling him some of the details about that, which like one of the more rewarding experiences of your life. If you can tell like a little bit about what you do to one of the most winningest coaches in the history of sport. You know what I mean? Like, It was awesome. But like, I've heard him talk anytime he talk, like, so when I go, I don't like go to pick the subject. I go to listen to a certain coach. So whatever they're talking about, it doesn't matter to me. Like every year, whatever Petro is going to talk about, it doesn't matter if it's culture or defense, it doesn't matter at all. I'm going to go listen to him talk. If coach is talking on transition or winning the national championship, I'm going to listen to Coach Berkman talk, because I want to hear what that guy has to say in that moment. It's always different, and I always learn a lot. But anyway, over pizza, I remember him like talking about like guys that he has at short stick defense. They're like Division I close defensemen. You know what I mean? Like at short stick, they're not even like. And I remember him saying, and I don't want to quote him without him being aware of it, but like I remember him saying that he has to like find a way to have a conversation with a kid that he might not be quite good enough at close defense, coming from a top 10 Division I program to play on game day at Salisbury. And like the modesty with which he framed that for the kid, you know what I mean?
Right.
Is awesome. Like he's such a caring human being. And like to hear him explain it in such a way that kid will pick up a short stick and be one of the best athletes on the field, but just not quite at the level we need you to be as starting defenseman at Salisbury. It's unbelievable to me. It's unbelievable.
Yeah. Well, listen, I appreciate this conversation went in such a different way than I thought it would go. And one of the great joys is learning about the people you thought you knew. Mm-hmm. And I have completely a different, we haven't spoke that often, but this is a really cool conversation. And I appreciate the time. We really have fortunate. The MIAA, as you mentioned, that how great a college at Albion is. The MIAA across the board has got some unbelievable member institutions, and it's
absolutely,
and some great coaches in that league as well. We did Mike Channels earlier. You've competed against him. You've obviously had some great success in the MIAA. But I want to thank you for the time. And like I said, if you get a chance to watch this interview, do, because I've learned more about you than I ever thought I knew, but it was also diametrically opposed to what I thought. I don't know if I had any thoughts about you, but a very articulate guy that, God, I can understand why you're successful at Albion, because this has been really fun, and I want to thank you for that.
Appreciate it, Greg. Yeah, no, I appreciate you mentioning the league. I think we're really doing a nice job. Brought in some really nice coaches that are doing a great job in the league here in the last few years. And Mike does a nice job. I hope you mentioned him a couple of times. So, we've been lucky. You mentioned our success. We're the only team that's played for every single MIAA title, and we won half of them. So, we feel very lucky, and it's something we talk about a lot, that, we carry that when we put the jersey on, and it's a responsibility that we have to others that came before us who built the program, and so, but I can't let you go until I tell you this story about Coach Pilot. I promised it to you.
Okay.
And it says a lot about like our place in the world as an MIAA team, or our place in the world at like Guilford at the time, versus being an established program and what comes with that, the ultimate responsibility, but also a little bit of props. Sometimes you get away with one. I'll never forget this. It was like our second or third year. So Roanoke was back down at our place, and I had stepped. It was one of those years where they were just talking about, our footwork and being on the field as coaches. It wasn't as serious, but it was just like, try to get off the field. It was before a couple of things actually happened on the field with guys bumping into each other. And anyway, I had my foot in the line's hop. I know the rule. I mean, it didn't matter. I was stepping on the line. I was about this far over the line. Coach and an official ran by me at about 12 miles an hour, 20 miles an hour, full sprint. And like while he's running, trucking by me in trail, he's like, off the line, coach, lights up. Like, I was like looking down, and I was like on this. I look out on the field, and Coach Pilot's like coaching his EMO unit, like at the 50-yard line. Like he was out on the field, like on the field of play. And I was like, man, you know what? Like, I really know today where I'm at in the world. And until you've done something significant, like you're going to be noticed for doing this little detail. Meanwhile, I've got, Coach Pilot, who's built a phenomenal career at Roanoke, standing like at the restraining line of the box, working with his EMO unit like it's a practice. It was unbelievable. Now, there might be a little exaggeration there on my part. I don't know, but that is the way I remember it, and I'll never forget it.
Cool. Thank you. I was going to kind of delve down to the quality of the MIAA stuff, but we had such a good conversation about everything else. It is what it is. I wanted to talk. I got to tell you, this has been a really fun conversation, and I hope more people will see this and get to know you better, because it's pretty remarkable. Jake, I had no opinion other than what I saw you coach, and obviously you've been successful, but I understand your success now. You have such a diverse background, and you care about your kids. I know that because I know some of the kids that play for you, and that's been the cool part of this thing. And that fraternity of this conversation, like I said, I can't call up Tiger Woods if it was golf or Bill Belichick if it was football, but with lacrosse, we've been able to put some pretty remarkable people on the show because they just answer the phone. But have a great season. I hope our trail.
Okay, thanks, Greg.
Hope our trail crosses, and if there's anything I can ever do, man, let me know.
Yeah, man, really appreciate it.
We hope that was an enlightening interview with Jake DeCola. I enjoyed it a great deal to learn a little bit about Jake, and a lot more depth than I thought. I didn't really know Jake that well, but it was really fun talking and getting to know him. And I think it's you're going to find out he knows what he's talking about. So good luck to the Albion this year, and we look forward to talking to him in the near future.